Welcome to the Finance Geeks podcast with Paul Cleworth and Warren Shute. Two financial planners shoot the breeze while sharing tips for making the most of your money and living your best life. Remember to follow, like, and subscribe to the show. And now over to the geeks in the studio. But they are not in a studio. They are geeks in their own office.
Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Finance Geeks podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Warren Shute. I'm here joined by the lovely
Paul Cleworth.
Hey, Paul. Today we're going to be talking about property versus pensions. So, Paul, before we dive into that, talk about property versus pensions, which is a real hot topic, what have you been up to?
So I've been working out recently. I've been doing a shoulder workout this morning, and earlier this week on Monday, I did some rowing in the gym. So I've even got...
How often do you get in the gym?
My protein shake here, which I've not started yet because it's early in the morning. It's a banoffee flavour from Form, which I'm going to have.
Nice.
Yeah, so you've got to have that, and help the muscle repair itself. So it was a bit of a killer this morning. Actually, I don't like doing shoulders normally. I much prefer doing chest.
How often do you get in there?
Yeah, so 3 times a week, 6 till 7 or 6 till 7:15, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then trying to do stuff with my kids now because they're, 12 and 9. I want to get them, they're taking an interest in it.
You are an athlete. You are the Arnold Schwarzenegger of financial planning.
Well, I've got pump delts this morning. Yeah.
What do they say?
The Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary "Pumping Iron" is one of my favourite documentaries of all time. It is just tremendous. If any of our listeners haven't watched it, you've got to go and watch "Pumping Iron." It's brilliant. Yeah.
Yes. No, it is a very good documentary. And to be watched, what was it, in the 1970s or something? I think it was filmed.
70s, yeah. Right, so I'll tell you what else I've been doing. I've been watching old films. I said last time I went to watch the Royal Gala, the Royal Film Gala at the Royal Albert Hall, or the Film Gala at the Royal Albert Hall. So I started to watch on the weekend with a friend of mine. I watched the original Magnificent Seven, 1960s, Yul Brynner, Charles Bronson, Steve McQueen, James Coburn. And it's the plot line is a bit rubbish, but actually it's just the music in it is iconic, and you've got to get into the Western. It's made in 1960. So
I love old film, black and white films, and the reason I love them is because I think the acting and the storyline is far better because they don't rely on special effects. So if you get immersed into the storyline and the words and the acting and stuff like that, it's far better than the modern films because the modern films rely so heavily on sort of extra effects and things like that in digital photography.
I've also been getting into Clarkson's farm recently. So I've watched, in fact, we just finished series 3 this week. And I'm asking myself, what do I do now? What do I do with my life? It's finished. I feel so lost because Clarkson's farm is very, very amusing. It's obviously very, very well edited. And they promote British farming, which is great, and it's just incredibly entertaining.
It is very good. It's very good what he's done for British farming. Yeah. Let's leave it there. I'm not the biggest fan.
What about you? What have you been up to?
Well, Ollie, in fairness, my son has had a busy week. He did the Bristol Half Marathon yesterday. The other day.
Oh, yeah.
Which
How did he get on?
Really good. He did really well. He did it 2 hours, 30 minutes, which was his outer side that he wanted to do it. That was the longest time. But the weather was really hot. And it was his first half marathon. So I was super proud of him.
It's a good accomplishment to do 13 miles. It's hard. Running 3 to 5 miles is quite tough, but 13 miles and then obviously pushing on to a marathon later on.
A lot of elevation. But he enjoyed it. And the nice thing is he's already signed up for Oxford Half Marathon. He's got a bit of momentum now with his buddies and stuff. But it's been his week, really, because he and his mum went to Buckingham Palace. He got his Duke of Edinburgh gold. He's done his Splon silver and gold, got his DV gold. And any listeners out there with young children, I guess probably starting around about 13 or so, highly, highly, highly recommend they do the Duke of Edinburgh. Go through the bronze silver gold. They can jump straight to gold when they're 17, 18, but do the 3 steps. And it's a fun. My daughter's going through it at the moment. She's doing gold at the moment.
Very good. Very good. Anything else?
No, not really. I think, we've broken 100 subscribers. Come
on. That's fantastic.
Round of applause to ourselves.
Big pat on the back.
It's if you are watching and listening to this podcast or on YouTube, please subscribe to the show. We then know that people take it serious and they like it, and it allows us to do it more often. If we don't get lots of subscribers, we kind of think, okay, well, we're not hitting the mark. So if you like what you're listening to, then let us know. And also let us know about what you would like us to talk about. We are two
additional topics.
Yeah, we're 2 practicing financial planners. There's nothing off the table. We're very happy to answer viewers' questions, that kind of thing. which kind of leads us in nicely to the main topic for today, what we're talking about.
Focal point for today. The focal point for today. Yeah, property versus pension.
I don't know about you, but I used to get this question all the time. Property versus pension, or I'd meet a new client and they say, "Oh no, it's okay. My property portfolio is my pension. I don't need a new pension." That kind of thing. Did you get questions like that?
More so in the past, I think.
Yeah,
because it's definitely gone off the boil. I mean, property prices now are generally quite high relative to where they were 15, 20 years ago, and because of rising interest rates, and because of tax inefficiencies, they're just perhaps not as popular now. There's also a lack of good supply, to be honest. There's still a lot of people, with demand to buy properties, but they're not building them fast enough. So, and it's a determining question, actually. If a client comes in and I see what they've got, and they've got 5 or 6 buy-to-lets, immediately I'm thinking, is there a good fit between what we do and what they're looking for? Because if they're already so,
ingrained,
I suppose, yes, it's committed to property.
Yeah.
And, are they willing to think about other ways to save for your retirement?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sometimes I think people need help, though, generally, because we don't know what we don't know. And I think sometimes people need a bit of guiding help. And if you go through them, what we're kind of going to go through today about the sort of the pros and cons of property investing with them, it kind of opens their eyes a little bit. It's what's actually beneficial or not. So let's talk about it. How should we run this?
Okay, so I think we'll start with the pros and cons of property, and then we'll get onto pensions later. I think property is actually, for a lot of people, easier to sort of understand. But the first pro, largely for property, is familiarity bias. A lot of people prefer property because it's tangible, because they can see it, because they can touch it, and they can understand it. And the next thing that it does generally, if it's a buy-to-let, if it's a residential property, which buy-to-lets are, it provides a rental income. So you're going to get your tenant in, you're going to rent it out for some money, and you might do it directly, or largely you might do it through a letting agent.
Staying on the sort of familiarity bit as well, I think also there is, and I've experienced this with clients, there's a flex there. Hey, I've got 5 buy-to-lets. Does that make sense? So, hey, I own that property, that commercial building there's mine. Hey, I get clients come in. It's like, so I've got this, I own this building here. Tesco's are in it. I've got that building over there. The local estate agents in it, that kind of thing. So that's going a bit more commercial, but there's definitely a flex element there.
Well, it's people who like to show off. They do. They like to say they own a number of buy-to-lets, and they'll renege on telling you that there's a problem with property, that it's difficult to manage, or that they don't appreciate when property prices fall. They say, "Oh, that's not my property." And that there's a mortgage and that it's leveraged and all of that. So, it's there's definitely it's easier to understand was the first point. That it's there, but it's what is it? I'm trying to think of the expression. It's a false sense of security, really, because there's a suggestion in one's mind that because I've got this property that it'll all be okay, and a lot of the times you'll forget the fact that you've got a mortgage on it that you have to pay off, or that you've got ground rent or service charges to cover, and you've got problems to deal with. So you only really appreciate it once you've gone through it yourself and you've bought property, and not just your home, but additional property, and seen what it's like.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, like I think you might have touched on it already, but almost like problem tenants as well. This really is a business. It's not an investment. You can outsource the collection of the rent and some of the compliance legal work to a letting agent, but when something goes wrong, they're just going to pick up the phone to you. So you could be on your holiday with your family, and you get a phone call saying the boiler's gone. What do you want me to do? And you're
and if it's not the tenant phoning you, it's the letting agent, because it depends if you're going to give them full management or not. But a lot of the time, full management can be 15% plus VAT per month, or it's expensive to do full management, so that they just deal with everything.
Yeah, we've noticed some clients then graduate, if that's the right term, from general sort of residential lets into HMOs, multiple lets, houses of multiple occupancy, or student lets, that kind of thing, sometimes corporate lets. And that really just brings another layer of complexity in relation to compliance and managing.
And to get the mortgage on, that's more difficult. You've got to have the insurances. There's a bigger legal aspect, so all of those are negatives. Those are cons. Just sticking with some of the pros for a second. With property, you can leverage. And so if you're putting down a 15 or 20% deposit typically for a buy-to-let, what you're doing is you're leveraging your asset. You'll be able to buy a more expensive asset with that. So if the house costs 300,000 and you're putting down 20%, 60,000, you've still got a mortgage, but a percentage growth, a 5% growth on that property on a bigger number is more, than it would be on a smaller number. So leveraging and borrowing is, I suppose it used to be more fun, and it's certainly more efficient and more profitable when interest rates were considerably lower. When we did get buy-to-let rates of 1%, 2%, 3%, and now they're 5%, 6%, 7%, they're much higher. Obviously, it's now less profitable. There's no question. If you've got a mortgage and on the property, they're putting down 15 to 20% just doesn't really work anymore to actually make sufficient money for it to cover itself, to wash its face. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's definitely. I think the thing to take away on that is it's definitely a business as opposed to an investment. So I would definitely look at it that way. And touching on interest rates, it's a fixed income investment as well. So if you're a listener and you're not too sure what I mean by that, is the income that you generate from that almost works inversely proportional. Should I say the capital value works inversely proportional to the interest rates. So as interest rates start coming down, as we saw probably during our lifetime and many viewers' lifetime, from sort of like the mid to early 1990s all the way through to the 2000s, interest rates were coming down. As interest rates come down, property prices increase. It works inversely because if you think of it logically, it's less expensive to buy a house. Therefore, we could buy a house. There's a whole manner of other things going on during that period as well, with inflows of mortgages and things. And I don't really foresee that period happen again, not until we forget it, at least.
Yeah. But there's been a lot of talk about interest rates recently. I mean, in the news at the moment, inflation may well be coming down, soon down to the government target of 2%. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that the Bank of England are going to reduce interest rates down to 2 or 3%. If anything, it's a suggestion, it's a prediction that they might come down to 4.75, in the future, maybe it's by next year. First cut is predicted to be August this year, and then later in the year. But we just got to assume it's rates are not lower for longer as they used to be. That used to be the saying. We just thought after the credit crunch they were just going to be low for a long period of time, which they were. Now they're just going to be higher for longer. The long term, the average 4.5%, 5% is what they're going to be for a considerable period of time, I reckon.
And when we saw those interest rates go up recently, they kind of shot up quite high. We saw a lot of property investors trying to scramble for the door and sell. And that's when you really appreciate how illiquid property is. You can't just sell a property as and when you want. If you're a listener and you try to sell your main home, typically if it's of substantial value, you're going to wait a period of time to sell it. If it's more mainstream, there's more demand for it, so there's more liquidity. But you start selling property, it's going to take a little bit of time to sell it. So the illiquid
it's a minimum of 3 months, isn't it? It's usually more like 4 to 6 months now as a minimum to sell the property with all of the legals that need doing.
I think that's from offer, though. Does that make sense? And I'm thinking from marketing the property, you could be sitting on a property for well over 6 months before you sell it.
Yeah, I agree now, especially with those that are, as you say, scrambling for the exit and they're saying, right, I need to get rid of this. And I've suggested and advised clients prior to interest rate rising to say, get rid of these properties. They're really, really not going to make you any money. So we think about one of the cons is the return. With property, you get a capital growth over time, theoretically, and property generally rises over time. And then you'll get a rental income as well. And the rental yield is the annual rental income you get as a percentage of the property. So as an example, if you've got a £200,000 property and the rental yield is 5%, it's £10,000 per annum, $833 a month. The thing is, though, it's very difficult to get a gross rental yield of more than 5%. It's just unheard of because property prices are high now. And although rents have been going up, they've not been keeping track. So there are certain parts, especially with HMOs and with certain parts of London, you can get rental yields of 5%. When the rental yield is 4.5%, and then you take off mortgage costs, and then you take off lettings costs and insurances and tax on rental income, it's very difficult to get more than 2.5% as return. So you're then relying on your capital growth of the property to make any money at all.
Yeah. And I guess go back to your original point, to be equal in this argument, you are looking at your property growth on your deposit in that example. Does that make sense? So you're getting you're getting a leverage return. I still don't back property, but I'm trying to be neutral on our argument here. So definitely.
One of the positives is that we should mention is that you can buy as many of them as you want. So, for example, when we get into pensions, there's only so much you can put into a pension, which we'll get on. But with property, not only can you buy as many as you want, but also you can access the income and the capital prior to, a typical retirement age of 55 for a pension, going up to 57. So that is a positive that you can do that. And of course, you can buy commercial property, whether that's directly or inside a pension, whereas you can't buy residential property inside a pension. But, here we're talking about buy-to-lets, essentially, residential property. And, the positives are, I think, on the lower side. The cons, the negatives, are definitely higher. You do get fluctuating property prices. The entry costs of buying a property is not just the deposit. You've got to pay stamp duty. And if you're already a homeowner, an extra 3% stamp duty. Then you've got valuation fees, legal fees. You've got to get insurances. It's very, 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 very costly.
Tell me about this extra 3%, because some viewers might not be aware of it.
So when you already own a buy-to-let, a residential property, and then you go to buy a second property, and buy-to-lets are classed as residential, you have to pay an extra 3% stamp duty land tax on top of that. And so you can be paying 8% or more. It can be, if you buy it through a business, it can be 15% stamp duty. So all these entry costs, you've got to factor in that when you sell in the future, you've got to cover all of those costs. And then the other big negative is, of course, capital gains tax and how much it's been rising for property owners. So the capital gains tax allowance has come down from 12,300 to 6,000 to 3,000 now is the gain you can earn before you pay tax. But it used to be that you could use what was called lettings relief, and you could have up to 40,000 of gain before you paid tax. There's none of that now, unless you lived in the property with your tenant, which just makes no sense. No. So, difficult, costly getting in, and tax inefficient, illiquid, and costly getting out.
And capital gains tax rates are higher?
So capital gains tax rates, as you know, for property are either 18% or 28%. So if the gain, after you've factored in all your expenses, added to your income pushes you, you're still in the basic rate band, it's 18% as opposed to 10%. For normal, investments,
or 24 for a high rate taxpayer,
and it used to be 24, but it was 28. It's gone down to 24. That's right, but 24 for a high rate taxpayer. I mean, it's a lot of extra tax to pay. So we used to think that this is good because it's less than income tax rates at 20, 40, or 45. But as I say, with the extra entry costs and now the extra the tax inefficiency of getting out, it's very hard to make money buying and selling property.
In the whole equalisation of capital gains tax rates to income tax rates, if the Labour government get in, are a different topic altogether.
Make it worse. That make it even worse.
What we have noticed is a number of clients almost, I keep using the word scramble, I shouldn't keep repeating myself, but moving towards holiday lets. So holiday lets are taxed slightly differently. They're taxed more as a business, and you can get entrepreneurs relief, business asset disposal relief on those. So they can be taxed at 10% on the sale. But for general buy-to-lets, very tax inefficient. And of course, income as well. The rental income, if there's any rental income, is assessed against your income effectively, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, it is. And it used to be a couple of years ago that you could offset the mortgage interest in full against the rental income, as well as your other costs before paying tax at your marginal rate of income tax. And now, as a higher rate taxpayer, you only get basic rate tax relief on the interest. That's it. It's a lot less efficient. So you've just got to pay, especially if you're higher rate tax or additional rate taxpayer, a lot of extra tax on that income. So again, given it its fair due, fair credit, if you can buy a property for a low price, if you can add value to that property, even if it's a buy-to-let, if it's a second property, by developing it and it goes up in value and you can make money on the capital appreciation, those they can work. If you buy it without a mortgage, so you're not susceptible to interest rate rises, and you happen to have really great tenants, and it's a way of diversifying your total assets by having this property. And so one of the positives is that, during periods of market declines in equity markets, that doesn't necessarily translate to affecting in any way your rental income. So it is a method of diversification, which is a positive. But I think our listeners will probably gather that both of us are fairly negative about property generally.
Yeah, but do you know, I'm not necessarily against it. I just want clients to understand what they've got. So we've kind of covered capital gains tax, we've covered income tax, and then you've got inheritance tax as well. So
it's inside your estate, isn't it? I mean, this is the thing. It's tricky that any property that you have, unless you're running it through a business, and especially you can't easily put property into trust. It just doesn't really work, I don't think, very effectively, because the trust pays so much tax. So yeah, it stays inside your property. And so the other thing that people should know is that if you've got a buy-to-let, let's say it's £300,000-400,000 buy-to-let, for example, and there's no mortgage on it, and you think, good, I'm going to give this property to one of my children. If there's no money changes hands, the children don't necessarily need to pay stamp duty on the purchase, but you've still got to pay capital gains tax on the disposal of that property. You can't just give it to them. So it's a realised gain, even if you give it to them for no money. So it's
there is a quirk in the Inheritance Tax Act that if you are, I'm mentioning this in case you are a property investor where you've got a property, you can gift property away 7 years after your death. It will be outside your estate, but still retain the income from it. So that might be something.
7 years before your death.
Yeah. So as long as it's a pet, so as long as you gift the asset away 7 years before you die, you can still retain the income, rental income from it. It is a quirk. You do need to get a legal agreement drawn up, but for any listeners who are thinking, oh, okay, that might be an option. I don't want to get rid of my property. I like the rental income. That could be something that works for them.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about property there, Warren. Why don't you start talking about pensions and some of the pros and cons of pensions? Should we start with the pros, the positives?
So do you know what? I just look at a pension as being a trust. And I think when I describe pensions to clients, I say, hey, look, it's a retirement trust. It sits outside of your estate. You can transfer money into it, and it's available then for when you retire at a later date or for inheritance for your children later down the line. The advantage of pensions is you can get some great tax breaks on your payments going in, particularly if you earn less than £200,000 a year. So you can put the money into the pension, it grows tax-free, and then it's available to you at a later date. How would you sort of describe a pension to clients? Something along those lines?
Yeah. I think that the word pension for a lot of people is negative, because there's a lot of people still associate it with a inefficient vehicle, or they think that it's not right for them because they can't access the money until their mid-50s, going up to 57 in April 2028, and think, oh, this is not good because I've not got liquidity with this pension. I can't access it. And I think that there's still ramifications from the days of Equitable Life, when one of the life insurance companies went bust, and people saying, oh, if I put it into my pension, I'm going to lose that money in some way. Let's be clear, a pension is just a tax wrapper. That's all it really is. And I like your ideology there of it being a trust, a retirement trust. But if it's a tax wrapper, like an ISA is a tax wrapper, a pension says, well, what are you going to put inside it? I'm going to put largely unit trusts and OICs, funds. That's what most people put in. You can put lots of other things inside, which we don't have time to get into, but mostly it's funds, equity funds, bond funds, and it's meant to be for your retirement years, for your second life, for your third act, for the future. So it's a good thing, in my opinion, that you can't access it. Yeah. But as you say, putting money in up to 60,000 a year, and sometimes more with carry forward, where you go back to previous years and mop up your allowance you haven't used, it's the most tax efficient vehicle that you can pretty much get to save for your future.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it just works very, very well. The modern pensions are not what they used to be in the past. And you can gear. So we spoke about gearing with residential properties. You can gear if you buy commercial buildings as well. So if you want to do it that way.
Inside a self-invested pension or a SAS, a small self-administered scheme. So you can do that. Yeah.
But generally speaking, just buying equity funds will deliver you a return that's more than adequate for most individuals.
So there's the tax benefits, the tax relief going in at your marginal rate. You'll get, if you're part of a workplace pension, you're going to have employer contributions as well, which is great. And we'd encourage everybody who's part of a workplace pension to benefit from auto enrollment. You put money in, your employer puts money in. It's sort of free money. You know, don't opt out. That doesn't make sense. Secondly, you can diversify a lot more with a pension than you can with a property. One property is in one place. With your pension, you can diversify into global equity exposure, global bonds. You can just buy a considerable number of assets within it. And I would say that with the tax relief, for the majority of people, especially if they're funding it regularly, that you'll build up a much bigger pot with a pension over time than you would by buying property. Now, again, there's lots of tweaks there and quirks there, but I think we can agree it's a lot simpler to own a pension than it is a property. And the entry costs are considerably lower to get in. You can start it with 50 quid a month or £20 a month, put whatever you can afford in. But there's a notion, isn't there? There's a concept that pensions are somehow inaccessible. And although you can't access them until 55, going up to 57, the reality is they are incredibly flexible when it comes to taking benefits. So tell our listeners how you actually take benefits out of a pension, how you take your money out in the future.
So, as Paul sort of said, age 55 onwards, 57, 20, 28, you have access to your pension. You get up to a quarter of the fund tax-free, and there's a lifetime limit on that now, around 250,000. And then you've got the option of either transferring that money to an insurance company, where they'll then pay you a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. That's referred to as annuity. And they're less popular these days. Or you can just draw down on the fund, where you can just draw down an income payment from it. If you draw down a reasonable income, which generally is in the region of 4 to 5% a year, you can expect that pension fund to last you the rest of your life. If you draw down excessively, you heavily draw down on it, then you might deplete the fund down to zero. Now, you might be listening and thinking, well, why on earth would I draw down heavily on a pension and deplete it? Well, it may not be your full main pension. You might have a defined pension pot that kicks in at 65, 67. You got your state pension kicking in later, and you want to retire early. So you might take the benefits from 55, retire it, and you want it just to last maybe 10 years until 67. So you just want to divide it through 10 years and draw down heavily so you can then rely on defined benefit pensions at a later date. So there are strategies in which you can draw money down. But generally speaking, the money is very, very flexibly accessed. How
many of your clients are in income drawdown? Because I'd say about 99.9% of mine that are drawing income use income drawdown as the method of taking the money out.
I completely agree. If you're taking if you're accessing your pensions, then most people are going to go into drawdown. And the way we generally do it is what we refer to as phase. So you take a little bit of tax-free cash, a little bit of earned income every month or every year, rather than taking the full lump sum of tax-free cash on day one. But it does depend on your circumstances.
But that's the perception, isn't it? I had a client the other day that thought that she had to take the full 25% of her pension out. So her pension was about 600,000, 25% is 150 grand. And I said, no, what's the point in taking the full 25%, 150 grand, and plonking it into your bank account in cash? That doesn't make any sense. We can take it a bit at a time. I mean, if you needed the money to pay off a mortgage or to buy something, okay, you can draw it all out. But generally, you'd as you said, you phase draw it out, and you'd say, well, how much do you need? And they say, oh, I need 5 grand as a lump sum for something, and I need 2 grand a month. And so with a lot of our clients, we sometimes, if they're working still and they just want to top up their income, we just draw the tax-free cash out monthly. And it's incredibly flexible, any amount that you want, any variation. But here's a stat for you. Did you know that you can have a pension of £419,000 and pay no tax?
I didn't know that. Because
the personal allowance is 12,570. So what you have to do is, if you're going to draw 12,570 from the taxable part of your income at 4%, and then you divide that by 0.75, you get a figure of 419,000. So 419 times 75%, you take your tax-free cash out, you're left with 314,250 in your pot, and you say, just draw 4% out, Mr. Client. So he does, and that 4% is the 12,570, which is the personal allowance, which means there's no tax. So this assumes the person's got no other forms of income. But we do have situations where a lot of our clients draw $1,047.50 a month. So they get a normal tax code of 1257L. We're drawing it from the taxable part of their pension, but there's no tax. And then we top that up with drawings from ISAs, GIAs, and tax-free cash from the pension. And until their state pension kicks in their late 60s, we can draw income from their portfolio completely tax-free.
Okay.
Boom.
Yeah. It's interesting. We rarely access the pension when they have other investments. It's one of those pots, because we talked about inheritance tax on the pensions, on the property side of things, and that's important to say. Pensions are very inheritance tax efficient. It can pass down to the next generation. Pre-age 75, it passes tax free. But our preference really is that you would access the money outside of the pension.
I agree, but it kind of depends on the size of the pots. So if you've got a client with a 200 grand in a GIA, 200,000 in an ISA, and 600,000 in a pension, so it's 200, 600, £1 million pot, you'd probably, in that scenario, draw down from the general account first without incurring CGT, and then draw down from the ISA, and then you'd push out the pension later on. but it depends on lots of factors, like what if they've got final salaries, when the state pensions kick in. This is where financial planning becomes an art to work out most efficiently for the client how much you need based on your health, longevity, your age, what forms of income you've got, and drawing and having a strategy to draw income in the most efficient way. And that's the bit where we add the most value, arguably.
And the art extends to what your views are on likely tax rates going forward, and how important it is for your next beneficiaries to inherit tax-free and things like that. So it is very much an art form. Financial planning is the most fantastic profession in the world because it's very scientific and evidence-based in our calculations of doing things. You have to be very accurate. But it's also meeting clients' emotions and meeting them where they are and what's important to them, that individual, because no two individuals are exactly the same.
Yeah. You mentioned, Warren, that the pensions are outside your estate for inheritance tax purposes. You just explain for our listeners that, what you do in terms of expression of wish and what happens pre-75 and post-75 of your death, and what that means when it says it's outside of your estate. What does that mean?
Yeah, so when you complete your HT 400 form and you do your inheritance tax, someone dies, you look at you refer to as your free estate, and that's the money that's within your estate that's taxable. So things like money in your bank account, the property you own, that kind of thing. Not necessarily things that pass by survivorship that are jointly owned. But your pension sits separate to that. It's not owned by you. It's owned by the trustees, and the money is just held for your benefit. So it's not included in your free estate. So the way that we generally set up pensions is that we would then complete a nomination of beneficiary form, which is available for all pensions, to nominate who will receive that money in the event of you passing away. And our preference is that money is then nominated into a discretionary trust. So what then happens in the event of you passing away is, rather than that money going to your surviving spouse or your children, it then goes straight into a discretionary trust where your surviving spouse or children are trustees, so they look after the money, and then they can access that money, generally via loans, in the future if they wish.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned that to me previously, that you do it that way. I generally just put the surviving spouse and the children as expression of wish as nominated beneficiaries. So let's be clear. If you've got a will, you do not put your pension assets in the will as to say where it goes. It sits outside of your estate, and the will determines the assets that are inside of your estate. And so somebody dies, they produce a death certificate, and they send it to myself. I've already noted that the expression of wishes says that husband's died, he wants it to go to his wife. Within a week or two, max, we can have that money go to them. And generally, rather than pay it to them as a lump sum, unless they need it, we retain it in a pension wrapper, and it's just transferred over no cost, no fee, and gets allocated to the surviving spouse. And if the pension member dies pre-75, it's all tax-free to the recipient. Over 75, it's at their marginal rate. So yeah, I really like it. There's no question the death benefits are considerably better for a pension than a property in all ways in terms of how tax efficient it is.
That's a really good example there, what you just said about financial planning being an art. So two very well qualified, very experienced financial planners have different approaches. Generally, this is a generalization because every client's individual, on how they prefer to treat death benefits. So I like to leave mine into a trust, so it's ring fenced outside. Paul likes the simplicity and the speed, the efficiency of nominating it to the surviving spouse. So no right or wrong. It's what's right for the client.
Let's talk about some cons of pensions, because we don't want to give them too many benefits. One is that we mentioned earlier, you can't access it till 55 or coming up for 57, which again I don't think is a bad thing because it is for the future, but it's that is the case. Another negative is you can only take 25% tax free. The rest is taxable, but again it's you do get all the tax breaks going in, but it's less tangible. Like property, it's tangible. You can touch it. Pensions, you think, where is it? It's somewhere in the ether. It does exist. It is there. It's money that's on a document with a life insurance provider or wrap platform, and you're susceptible to market dependency, to market fluctuations. If your money's invested in the stock market, that is a negative. That market performance will determine how your pension is performing.
For me, I think the biggest negative is the limitation of how much we can put into a pension. We are capped at £60,000 for most people. If you're a high earner, then that tapers down, so you can put in a lesser amount. And like you said, if you're an employer, particularly if you own your own company, you can do carry back. But
carry forward.
Used
to be called carry back. Yeah,
been in the game too long. But generally speaking, the limitations on how much you can put in is the biggest restriction for me.
It's stupid that someone is earning a ton of money. Let's say it's over 300 £60,000. At that level, your annual allowance is only £10,000. And it's called the tapered annual allowance down to £10,000. Now that's £10,000 gross. So you earn a load of money. Good for them. They pay a load of income tax. They can only max them and put 20,000 into an ISA and 10,000 into a pension. So they either spend that money or buy property. Because when you think, what do you do? So a lot of people that earn a lot of, the high incomes do often buy additional property because there's not a lot else tax efficient they can buy. Maybe they buy EIS, VCTs, maybe they buy offshore bonds and other investments. But it is a bit silly that they can't, contribute to their pension. It was suggested, in previous budgets prior to them coming out that they would have a set rate of income tax relief, like 30%, 25, 30, or 33. I've heard them all, for everybody, regardless. And if everybody could put in the same amount, it would be fairer in my mind. But
maybe it depends on the individual's financial affairs and stuff like that. If you've got a very profitable company, then it's quite reasonable that you might start putting in more than £5,000 a month. So it's it is whether it is. But overall, pensions very, very tax efficient. Great vehicles to support your future years.
So I think we've our listeners would probably have a good idea as to which we prefer. But why don't you tell me, Warren, which do you prefer, property or pension, or a bit of both?
No, generally speaking, just pension. I don't really see the need, even for commercial buildings these days. I used to lie on the side of, maybe there's an element for commercial, but you walk down a high street or look at vacancies and things like that. When you buy property, you're buying a business. If that's what you want, if you want a job or you want to employ people to run it, then great. But otherwise, the returns of the great companies around the world that deliver you pensions, hands down. How about yourself, Paul?
So generally pension, yes. I think that if the ideal financial setup, and I've tried to model this and put this in a diagram, a PDF. We might talk about it in a future episode. What's the ideal financial setup? And it includes mine, a combination of cash, a general investment account, which is sort of a brokerage account, as you know, where you can put in direct shares, unit trusts, and so forth, and funds, ISA, pension, offshore bond, and property. And so the property element is usually one's home, a residential home. You're still investing in property that way, and it will augment in value over time. But those that have, let's say that it's someone has surplus monies, they've already filled their ISA, they've already filled their pension. It does happen that people, as you say, want to either buy a holiday home for themselves, whether in this country or abroad. That can be good because you can use it yourself as well as rent it out via Airbnb and HomeAway and all these companies. But I used to have a number of buy-to-lets myself, and I sold all of them over the years because I just saw it coming almost. They were becoming less tax efficient, and I thought I need to get the equity out to pay down my residential mortgage. So there's a problem when you see someone who's in their late 40s, 50s, where they have a big residential mortgage and they have a 5 or 6 other buy-to-lets as well. And with mortgages on, and they're leveraged up to the max, and you're just thinking, this is not. You might feel, or it looks on paper, the gross number of assets look high, but when you take all the mortgages and the hassle, wouldn't want to be there.
Completely agree.
So pension over property, for sure.
It is that hassle factor for me. It's it's a job at the end of the day.
Yeah. Ultimately, the choice depends on your risk tolerance, your financial goals, your personal preferences. Let's move on. Tell us any interesting fact or quote or anything you'd like to mention, an anecdote or something for our dear listeners and viewers to round off this show.
So the only quote I've got for us this week is something that I read recently, and it really sort of hit home to me. And it goes along the lines of, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response is our growth and our freedom. So I think a lot of people will get a stimulus, get an input from somebody, and they'll just react. And what it's really saying is, it's that space, that gap between us responding and us replying gives us our freedom. So that was by Viktor Frankl. Wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. Have you read that?
No, I haven't. I've heard of the book. I remember I need to read that. That was very deep, Warren.
Thank you very much. How about yourself, Paul? Come on, lighten the mood.
Just a couple. This is one, a quote here. Real estate cannot be lost or stolen, nor can it be carried away. Purchased with common sense, paid for in full, and managed with reasonable care, it's about the safest investment in the world. Now, that was Franklin D. Roosevelt. And I'm not saying that the Americans, especially, this was a long time ago, a lot of people would believe this. And I know a lot of Americans that believe in property over anything else. Well, it's a different system. But I just think that was quite an interesting quote. The other one here is about planning. So second one, as in all successful ventures, the foundation of a good retirement is planning. And that's by Earl Nightingale.
Yeah,
I like that.
I agree with that one.
Tried to give one on each there. Bit on property, bit on planning and pensions,
So is that all for you for today? Anything else you want to share with the listeners?
There's lots of interesting facts that I have, but I think if I start telling you what the facts are now, you'll cut me off and you'll say that's a bit too geeky and boring. So I've got one if you want one.
No, I don't.
Next time, then.
Go on.
No. All right, let me tell you something. I heard Jimmy Carr, the comedian, talking about.
I'm going to see him.
You're going to what? Sorry?
Ollie and I got tickets to see him.
He was on my social media feed, and he was talking about this very fact. So he didn't include some of these stats, but I wanted to mention them. Right. So this is a realization that he's had that's topical. So I mentioned to you last time, and it was cut out of our previous podcast, that the universe is 13.7 billion years old.
Again.
Just listen. Some now think it's double the size, double the age, 26.5 billion. The Earth's been around 4.5 billion years, right? Homo sapiens, man, has only been around 315,000 years. And did you know there's only about 109 billion people ever lived, of which 7% live today? 8 billion people live today. The point is, we are incredibly fortunate to exist in this moment, incredibly lucky to be shaped by all the collective wisdom and contributions of our ancestors. And I think that it means we should remind ourselves how lucky we are to be at the pinnacle of where the man is today and where the Earth is today, and how many things we take for granted, from a few hundred years ago. So it's being grateful. That's what I want our listeners to sort of think about.
I agree with that. And we look at the golden years in hindsight. And it's my belief that these are going to be the golden years right now. I think there's some great times. So it's okay. Before you go on and give us another one, I'm going to say that's a wrap for today, Paul. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, and subscribe to our show. Remember, please subscribe to the show, then we know you're enjoying it and listening to it, and we'll carry on. Please leave comments and any questions you may have, and we will definitely answer them in future episodes. Until the next one, it's bye from me.
It's bye from me. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us for today's discussion. If you have questions or comments about this podcast or topics you'd like to suggest for the show, please put these in the comments section on YouTube. Remember, if you find yourself humming our theme song for the next week, it's not a sign of brainwashing, it's just a testament to our awesomeness, or possibly a mild earworm. Consult a doctor if symptoms persist. This show is designed to be informational only and does not constitute investment or financial advice. Please contact a regulated financial advisor before taking any specific action.